next speaker is Dr. John Maher. John is Vice President of Research for Marshall University and Executive Director of the Marshall University Research Corporation. Before coming to Marshall, he was Executive Director of the Chemical Alliance Zone. He had, before then, worked with Union Carbide for 21 years. John is also co-principal investigator of the Citation project. The title of John's presentation is Cyberinfrastructure and Research. John?
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? All switched on and everything's working well? Okay, good. First, I want to apologize to you for the irony of listening to a talk about cyber infrastructure from a guy whose slides look like this, okay? That's, I think we'll concentrate on some relatively straightforward items of discussion, trying to call forth what is actually going on in science and trying to relate to how it's going to change what we do as scientists and how that might impact what we're doing as a society. I'd start off with just a simple definition of cyber infrastructure, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it really has to do with the coordinated aggregation of software and hardware to support current and future discoveries in science and integrate all of that to provide a useful, usable computational and data framework. So it's about, computation, it's about storage, and it's about accessing all of that and tailoring it really for the scientific enterprise. Now, I just want to say, and you've heard it from everybody here who's talked so far, Selby, Paul, Jan, change is afoot. And I think it's being driven by three factors. One is that the accessibility, the technology is developing, and it's allowing us to do certain things, so we're starting to do them. That has consequences. The second thing is, I think, as I'll try to reveal here, there's an element to our participation in this cyber infrastructure revolution that has to do with preserving our own self-interest, and I'll maybe talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I think maybe even most importantly for all of us here today is there's immense opportunity, as Selby was alluding to, in terms of what we can unlock by our participation in this cyber infrastructure tidal wave. Now, there are several trends that I'm familiar with. I used to work in the electronics industry, and am familiar with Moore's law, which is dictating that CPU transistor density and clock speed is doubling every 18 months. There's a related law called Gilder's law about network bandwidth increasing by a factor of 4 every 3 years. And there was just a general trend in storage growth that it is increasing by a factor of 100 every 10 years. So this is putting a lot of horsepower at our fingertips. And as scientists, we like to play, and we're starting to get involved. The scientific method, is based on, as Francis Bacon developed it, is based on observation, formulating hypotheses, devising experiments to test those hypotheses, and moving forward to a confirmation to sort of extract truth and form from the void of what is unknown. And implicitly, we're assuming that we have a trained mind that's applied to this, so we know everything about what's going on in the rest of the world of science, and we're making good progress. So I'll sign a little homework coming out of this, but there's a very interesting article, Strong Inference. It was way back in time, 1964, before any of this, and it sort of describes the current state of the art of the scientific method. And keep that in mind as we go forward here. So there's a lot that's changing. First of all, with that educated mind, scholarship is changing. There's an explosion of literature. There's a transition from closed to open publication. All of that open information is now accessible to you as a scientist or a citizen. And there's a wave of digitally accessible literature and search tools to pursue it. The explosion of data that Jan is talking about is real. So out of all of that, there's unprecedented accessibility to all of the data underlying that publication. So you don't just have the conclusions of the scientist, you see what went into those conclusions, and it's up to you to examine and perhaps reinterpret that information with in different ways. So we used to say 3 weeks in the lab will save you 3 hours in the library. I don't know what the current saying would be, but it's just 3 weeks in the laboratory will save you a moment on Google or something like that. So as a scientist, you have unprecedented search tools and data to look at to inform your scientific creativity. And that's really quite new. As scientists, we love data. You know, if you ask a scientist how their project is going, they'll say, well, I just need a little bit more data. I mean, that is the way the world works for the scientists. But we collect it, we store it, we visualize it, we interpret it, we simulate it, and all of that, as you've seen from the other talks here, is being revolutionized by the capability that's in front of us. So, as far as data is concerned, the thing that's changing is the amount of data. And this is a very verbose way of saying something that Jan said in a couple of pictures. But you know, if I have one DNA sequencing machine, and I think this is a generation ago, Joan Wilson, but you know, we're putting out 9 terabytes of data in 1 year. You know, and more than 20 new U.S. Libraries of Congress are going into this sort of data stream every year. That's huge. How we handle it, what we deal with, how we deal with it, and how we utilize it is really a very significant challenge in front of us. Luckily, as everybody has also alluded to, we're developing a much larger capability nationally, internationally, and here on the Marshall campus to deal with that data. So we now have access to high performance computing and the storage that is needed to support it. And then sitting in our desktop, you know, we have access to the TeraGrid and all its capabilities, have access to supercomputing at our desktop as if we were sitting at Lawrence Livermore or Oak Ridge National Laboratory or any of the others. So within certain security constraints, of course. So that connectivity and computation is giving us access to unprecedented computing power. As Jan was saying, we have access to instruments on a remote basis that we couldn't begin to think about having here. We can conference as scientists, we can share our data, and we can collaborate in ways that were completely unheard of even 10 years ago. All of this is, you know, just to take an example, it's enabling a revolution in biomedical research. You hear, if you read a lot, you'll hear about people talking about the $1,000 genome. They feel that that's the point at which people will start to pay to have their own personal genomes sequenced. But think beyond that. You know, think about the $10 genome and what this is going to involve in the application of personal medicine when this technology continues to advance 10 or 15 years down the road. Same thing with systems biology. We hear about genomics and epigenetics and proteomics and the microbiome. You know, this is your genetic material and how it's controlled and the products that it makes and the organisms that coexist with it in your body. All of these are complex interacting systems, and we're starting to approach the scale of data storage and examination and computational interpretation where we can start to understand how all of these things fit together and make predictive choices, really, about your health and what's going on. Similarly, in clinical research, Jan alluded to this, you know, the advent of electronic medical records and that huge amount of data, if properly depersonalized, will allow unprecedented data mining of those medical records for discoveries that will advance the healthcare of all of our society. The Royal Society in England put together a report not too long ago called Knowledge, Networks, and Nations. And this is where we're starting to get into the self-interest part of cyber infrastructure. The world is changing, okay? And I think they're dead on this. The center of gravity is shifting in the world of science. And that was evidenced in their last report by a very, you know, it's a fact. Projecting beyond 2011, the Royal Society said that the landscape of science would change dramatically. China has already overtaken the United Kingdom as the second leading producer of research publications. But sometime before 2020, and it could occur as early as 2013, China is expected to surpass the US. So, you know, as far as sheer volume and sheer, you know, number of publications, we are no longer going to be the epicenter or the center of gravity of the scientific world. And from another report by the Royal Society, Scientific Century, Securing Our Future and Prosperity, they were noting trends, and you can't really see this very much, and I wish the president were here, because he always says that physiology is the central science, but see, I'm a chemist, and there's chemistry right there, so just wanted to let him know that, but I will later, you can bet on it. Anyway, but what they're looking at here is a network map of cross-citation between disciplines, and they're analyzing those trends, you know, again, revealing in a pictorial manner exactly how cross-linked and interconnected science is becoming. So it's no longer enough just to know one discipline. You have to be kind of tapping into what is going on in all the disciplines around you, and that's where the discoveries are coming from. And we say that a lot, but this is a particularly good representation of it. So when you look at it from that point of view, given the fact that the volume of data is increasing and we are shifting the locus of its production, and there's this burgeoning interconnectedness in science, it doesn't stand to reason that the ability to access, interpret, and collaborate are going to be the key competitive edge in this world. And that's what cyber infrastructure is all about, and I think that's what each one of the speakers who's talked to you before is really trying to drive at. So why do we need it? And that's the question I'm trying to answer here. So the three-part answer is, one, because we can. That's really the accessibility part. We can do this, so we will. But simulation and visualization, big data, deep science, all of those things that you heard Jan talk about are there. But the second reason is the world of science is changing, and we need to adapt to compete. And I think that's very important. And then the final reason is the opportunity-based one. We need to go where it can take us, because that's where our future is. So where can it take us? Cyber infrastructure is changing science. There are emerging new fields like computational social science. We've never heard of them before, but because of the accessibility of the data, because of the development of the search tools, folks can start looking at societal data in real time and try to understand what are the real patterns of human behavior and action, and how can we predict and respond. I recommend this article too, and you ought to take a look at it. There's a whole section in that issue of Science about computational social science, and it's really quite revealing, and it sort of takes your breath away as a traditional chemist, a hard scientist, about what is going on in the so-called soft scientists. This is where maybe a lot of the convergence is going to occur in the future, when we bring the hard sciences together with this type of quote-unquote soft science, and we really start to have things take off. The last one is even more sobering as a scientist, is that people have actually been able to take relatively simple physical systems and in an automatic manner do the science and derive the basic physical laws from them in an automated fashion. So in this article, they took a chaotic double pendulum, and they kind of hooked it up and monitored it, and through an automated algorithm, they were actually able to develop the underlying physical truth, and turned out to be Hamilton's double pendulum Hamiltonian. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to you, but that means all on its own, without any human interaction or creative input from a human, it was able to figure out the basic underlying physics and kind of deliver the result. So you say, well, we kind of knew where to look, and it took us a while to set that up. That's not really, very compelling at all. I just want to say that there's a whole other, kind of phenomenon, and a bunch of scientists out there who are starting to talk about machine science. And they are looking at, Jan alluded to this, but based on what's happening in artificial intelligence, computer programs are able to integrate published knowledge with experimental data and search for the type of patterns that we look for as scientists, and enable and develop new hypotheses without any human intervention. So that's a pretty bold claim, but that's what's going to happen. It really is. And you ought to take a look at machine science and read the accompanying articles to see where this. So what's happening is not only a revolution in what we do as scientists, but I think we're on the cusp of a revolution in how we do it as scientists. And we all need to be kind of looking forward to that and be prepared. So moving forward, I gave you homework. Up here I have these two articles. One is Strong Inference from 1964, the other one is Machine Science from 2010. These are sort of bookends on the thinking about the scientific method and how we work as scientists. Read them, compare and contrast, discuss among yourselves. Whoops. But you never thought you'd come to a lecture and get a homework assignment. But if you are on the cyber side, what would I ask you to do as the Vice President for Research? I'd ask you to engage your colleagues in their disciplines and reach out and collaborate. It's so important. Now, if you're not, and you're on the quote-unquote other sides, and you don't understand what's going on here in cyber infrastructure, or even if you're a citizen, what I'd ask you to do is get educated. Good place to start is one of the resources that we have available to us through the Cyber Infrastructure Consortium is the HP's High Performance Computing University.org. Engage in the CI initiative and reach out and collaborate. So it's pretty much the same thing whether you're a cyber guy or you're a science guy. Collaborate. And whatever your role, continue to participate like you are today in the campus dialogue on cyber infrastructure. So I thank you for your attention today. It's a brave new world coming, and appreciate your attention. I'll answer any questions. Thanks. When's lunch?
Well, during the break, I was chatting with Jack Carpenter. Part of the discussion was describing certainly the format or the way that we're conducting the Citation project. It's a sharing and collaboration with 5 institutions in Arkansas. We're sharing and collaborating with West Virginia University and West Virginia State University. And sharing being a key component of it. Now, each of us, including Marshall, is developing resources and capabilities, certainly for our own research, for the classroom, but and with all your experience in industry and now in higher education, how would you define or describe the sort of technological ecosystem that is the university and the communities and the businesses, and how does this, what we are doing here at Marshall, relate, or how can that be shared and connected with the business community?
Well, I think as Selby said, really does come down to relationships. I mean, and nothing that is on my horizon here in this presentation is going to help you if you can't talk to people, okay? But that willingness to reach out and collaborate, put a little bit of yourself out there, develop those relationships is extremely important. Collaboration is a very personal enterprise. It's a little like dating, if you will, and we won't go there too much on that analogy, but it really comes down to personal compatibility in a way that maybe when you do science from a top-down perspective, it's not entirely clear. However, when you're sitting at your desktop with the type of cyber infrastructure that Marshall has, and you're looking at the type of resources we've recently sort of brought into our armamentarium, you can sit there and say, I'm sitting here at my desktop and I have potentially 50 million collaborators out there in the world who are working in areas of relevance when you look at that network diagram in the science that I'm working on. And it is your choice and your kind of enterprise there to sort of filter it out, use the resources that you have, and work through those collaborations to produce the best result that you can for your science and the university. Does that answer the question? Go ahead, Jack.
John, what do you think all this has to do with the future of intellectual property? I mean, that's going to be really, I think, come to a head as more is shared and more of the global laws and understanding what that means. How's that going to change our way of competing and way of sharing?
Well, that being in the Department of Commerce and regulated by the U.S. government, it's not going to change as fast as the rest of the world around it is. But I think, on a certain intermediate timeline, as we start to look at this open access world of scientific research, a lot of the barriers are being broken down in terms of taking basic science into innovation. So speed and celerity and awareness become, as we were talking about, being networked and connected and interactive, become the key competitive advantages in terms of achieving value for your intellectual property. The U.S. is probably going to become a first patent nation along with the rest of the world, and so doing what we do to the extent that our stance on intellectual property protects what we do in the rest of the world, we have to be as informed, as aware, and as quick about what we do as we can to capture the value of the basic science that we're doing. And I encourage you, all of you at Marshall, to do that.
Question? Okay, John, we thank you for a great
Thank you very much.